Thank you very much for coming today. I'm Michelle Freed, and I'm the product manager for our education product focus on teachers, student, and parents. Really excited to have our guest speaker today. We've been trying really hard over the last year to learn from the luminaries in the education space to help us as we rebooted our focus on education and really help us understand what's happening in the front office of classes with teachers and students. So I like to, John Hattie is joining us. He's a director from the Melbourne Education Research Institute at the University of Melbourne, Australia. I think many of you have read his book, Visible Learning. And one of the things I'm really excited about is when you think about what the main conversations are in education today, he tells us that we're focusing on the wrong things. Many of you might remember the Gates Foundation in 2011. Bill came out and said that class size isn't one thing that's making a difference. It's teachers. So give the best teachers the biggest class, and you'll see changes in education. There's a lot of debate around that. So John is going to share with us a lot of data from his research, and also talk about some of the things that we can do. And hopefully at the end, many of you can think about areas that we can be investing in. In addition to his current role, he was previously the project director of ASTTLE and the professor of education at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. He's chair of the board of the Australian Institute for Teaching and School Leadership and the associate director of the ARC-SRI Science of Learning Centre. The Queen made him an Officer in the New Zealand Order of Merit for 2011 for his services to education. Do you have any sort of
still got my head.
You get a little crown to wear. You should totally wear that wherever you go. I think if I was knighted, I would carry a sword. Totally. His work interests include performance indicators, models of measurement, and evaluation of teaching and learning. He became internationally recognized for his body of work called Visible Learning. His books include Visible Learning for Teachers, based on the synthesis of more than 1,400 meta-studies covering more than 250 million students. We like to have that now. His research has influenced a generation of education leaders, shaping the direction of education around the world. We hear his work discusses the foundation of teaching and learning models from Australia to California, Canada to Denmark. So very, very happy to have you here. So John, thank you so much.
Thank you. And I noticed sitting there next to Maria, I can't move over here.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
I think the camera followed.
Oh, smart.
Are you mic'd?
I am?
If you're mic'd, you can go wherever you want.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for that introduction. And it's great being in a room like this where you people find data fun. Because I'm actually trained as a measurement. I'm a statistician. That's my background. I've spent most of my research career in the measurement world. And one of the things that I found when I first started off in the education space is that you're kind of tolerated if you can count numbers. And when I first started in the space, what struck me is that everyone I met knew what truth was in education. And certainly when I met my fellow academics, they all took me aside and said, if you're going to make a difference, you have to study this. And this was different from each person. And then when you meet teachers, have you ever met a teacher who said they were below average? No, they all have evidence that what they do works. And certainly then you go into teacher education, and wow, what an evidence-free institution that is, except they have evidence that what they do works. But you've been students in those same classes. They aren't all the same. They aren't all effective. So how come we've got a profession on the one hand where there is so much evidence that argues that it works, and everybody seems to be able to justify, and they come along to your professional development sessions, and they look at your products, and they're kind of like magpies. They pick and choose the bits they want to fit with their current model, because for them, their model works. It doesn't make sense. And so that's why I sort of started on this venture to say, could I change the rules of this game by asking about relative effects? Jumping ahead of me. And so when I published Visible Learning in 2009, I had added meta-analyses. And now, is that me or?
You can
Only folks on the phone here.
One of the hundreds that are interested in hearing you.
you can select them and mute them. Henry needs to mute.
That's
everybody.
great.
There you go. Okay, sorry.
Now I'm up to 1400. I first published this in 1989. Actually, I started the whole venture in a little office downtown University of Washington, 1984. I've published it since. The story hasn't changed much. Of course, I'm adding more data. And over the last 3 years, I've done the same. What I've done to visible learning with respect to achievement, I've done it looking at learning strategies. But that's another story. I'll perhaps come back to that. There's the 250 kids. And the thing that I think is the most intriguing here is there's the 0 point. Everything above here enhances learning. Hey, there's hardly anything we do to kids that harm them. Isn't that good news? And some of the stuff down here makes perfect sense. Like the effect size of bullying on achievement is minus 0.2. And so when you take out those kind of obvious negative ones, 95 to 97% of things that we do to kids enhances their achievement. All you need to enhance achievement is a pulse. And this is why 95 to 97% of things we do to kids enhances their achievement. This is why every teacher can argue, I have evidence I'm making a difference. This is why every politician can argue that whatever policy they intervene will make a difference. It will. That's why everything that's ever done in terms of technology, the things you do, professional development, everything we do in schools, it works. We've got to ban the concept. What works? Because what we're doing is we're justifying the de-professionalisation of our business. It makes perfect sense to me why parents can argue they can run schools better than educators. If they set the bar, can we enhance learning? And certainly in some countries more than yours, like England, 27% of the salaries in England in schools are now spent on teacher aides, non-professionals. 20% in New Zealand, it's 18%. In Australia, it's creeping up in this country. Why? Because they're cheaper. Why do you need professionals if anybody can change achievement? And certainly as I look what's happened in your country and other countries around the world in the last 10 to 15 years, your country like mine, in the last 16 years, and the PISA stakes is going backwards, despite the trillions of dollars that we're investing and reinvesting. And that leads to a cynicism out there about our investment. And that cynicism leads to that investment going down. Because, I would argue, we've set the bar at asking the question, can we enhance learning? Of course, I would argue, using the average, I want to know what the story is, underline the blue, compared to underlining that in the yellow. And the litmus test is easy. If you have a kid in school, do you want them in a class with a teacher in the blue zone or the yellow zone? Now, independently of all this visible learning work, let me give you another interpretation of the point 4. What I did is I asked the question, what's the average growth in effect sizes per year for any kid who attends school? So I took 26 states, no child left behind data. I took the SATs from England. I took the EASTL data from New Zealand. And I took the NAPLAN data from Australia. So this is huge numbers. To ask what was the average effect size of a year's growth. Anyone have any idea what that effect size might be? In all those 4 countries, it was exactly, to the decimal point, 0.40. So, these teachers, these schools are getting greater than a year's growth. These are getting less than a year's growth for a year's input. So there's another interpretation. So the bottom line is what's the interpretation in the blue and the yellow. Now, of course, if you, any of those who have looked at visible learning, I created a league table. From the top to the bottom, I'm up to now 250 different influences. The mistake is you can't just take the top and tick them off. And you can't take the bottom and say ignore them. It's that story. And it's the story I want to present here today. Look at those. I put to you that many of those are top of the debates. Like your country's had an incredible debate over the last 10 years about the nature of schools. and you've invented charter schools, and it's a hot political potato. I know both of your presidential candidates talk about charter schools. Class size, you mentioned that as a hot topic. Oh my gosh, how many trillions have you spent redesigning curricula? Common Core at all the states and curricula. All the structural things. If you look at that list, they're all unbelievably tiny effects in the yellow zone. In fact, I can't find a single structural thing that's in the blue zone. Why is it that we keep pouring our effort, money, debate into these topics? And don't get me wrong, it's not just the politicians. They're listening to the parents. In fact, we've just done a survey of 1,000 parents around Australia asking them what makes the biggest difference to schools, and everything they ask is on this list. Now, if the politicians are listening to the parents, they're investing in the wrong stuff. Now, that means, on the one hand, we should ignore the parents. On the other hand, my goodness, we have a massive job to educate the parents about how we should invest in schooling. And so, how do we change that debate from those structural things that don't matter? And you're going to see later some numbers, 0.8s, 0.9s. If you don't understand the effect size business, it's not that critical here this morning. What's critical is the relativities. Let me look at a few of the arguments. First argument, it's all about the student. Depends on what students we have. Well, with one exception, it doesn't. In fact, we're actually better off in schools if you're below average. We add more than a year's growth for those kids compared to those above average. The only one that really matters, you can see down there, is labelling kids. Take two kids of the same personality, the same behavioural characteristics, and label one. And you know the labels: ADHD, dyslexia, autism, Asperger's, and you get a minus 0.6 effect. Now, notice what I didn't say. I didn't say those things weren't real. Some of them are very real. What I said is the labelling. It's kind of like you go to your doctor and you're not feeling very well, and the doctor says, okay, I want you to go out and have these tests and have an MRI and have a blood sugar and do a treadmill and all that stuff. You come back and you get this lovely dashboard created by Microsoft of all that data. And the doctor says, aha, you've got disease X. Go away. Now, you'd be horrified. But unfortunately, that's what we do in education, particularly the parents. Let's create a label, a diagnosis for the kid, and then we know why the kid can't. Surely the point of diagnosis is intervention. And surely, as a doctor does, after they've done the intervention and given you the pills or whatever they're going to do, they monitor that. Hence the acronym that I'm going to come through today, and that it teaches us to die for. We need great diagnosis, we need great interventions, and we need great evaluation of those interventions to see if they ameliorate the diagnosis. Unfortunately, teachers are obsessed with the interventions. In fact, I'm at the stage of my career now, I don't want to ever go into a room and talk about how you teach. Couldn't care less. I'll come back to that. Not the students. The structural things. As Bill Gates has said, Andrew Schleicher has said, you can trace very, very simply the countries that have invested the most in reducing class size are the countries that are going backwards the most. Now, the effect is positive, but it's tiny. Here's the question. Why is the effect of class size so small? Your turn.
You're teaching the same way.
Yeah, it's exactly that. Teachers at a class size of 25 to 30, you put them in a class size of 15 to 20, they teach the same way. In a class of 25 to 30, who's been teachers in the room? All right, sorry, I'm going to pick on you too. What percentage of the time did you talk, on average?
I taught studio, so it was a little bit less than like a lecture series.
So what percentage roughly?
20%.
Okay.
Well, one was just a lecture series, so that was 90%, but my studios were probably 20%.
Most teachers on average say 40%. So studio, 20%, yeah. We've just finished a study in 3,000 classes in England. It's 89%. Since the 1950s, since Flanders' work, 60 to 80 is the norm, despite what teachers say. And teachers will look at you black and blue in the face and say, not me. Now I won't have time to go into this morning, we'll talk about it during the day. We've created an app that measures all this kind of stuff. And it is around 70 or 80% of the time. How many questions do you ask a day? Between 150 and 250. 97% plus of which the kids know you know the answer to. 90 to 95% plus require a surface level content answer. And 90 to 95% require or are given less than a 1 second response by the kids. How many questions do the kids ask in your class about their work they don't know the answer to per day? 2. Now folks, class sizes 25 to 30, that's the norm. What's it like in class sizes of 15 to 20? Teachers talk more. There are less student questions. There is less feedback. There is less group work. Of course you say that shouldn't happen. You're right, shouldn't. But it does, and that explains that. Does class size make a difference? Has class size made a difference? No. Could it? Well, maybe. If you changed the teacher questions and increased the student questions. If you changed the proportion of surface to deep. But it hasn't. Get over it. Don't spend your money on it. And here's the dilemma. Great teachers are great teachers almost regardless of class size, and I remind you that the top 5 out of the top 8 or 9 countries in the world in PISA have class sizes of 50 plus. Not that I'm advocating you should go there because it is a positive effect, so you're not arguing that increasing the class sizes make a difference, but be careful. Now, the reason I'm raising that one is that many of these things that do come near the bottom of the chart, it's worth asking. And the researcher in me says, what's going on here? That's the fun part, but I won't too much about the negatives today. So not the schools, it doesn't matter what the classes are. The teacher. Well, actually, there's not much effect on teacher. And the one that should bother the heck out of us is that one. And again, I put it to you, except for a moment that the content knowledge of a teacher doesn't matter. And ask yourself why it doesn't matter. Perhaps we can come back to that. But the one is, as you mentioned, Michelle, in the introduction, I now have a political job. I'm a cabinet appointee to oversee the AITSL group in Australia. And our focus over this last year has been on our teacher education programs. We have, in Australia, a population of around 24 million people. Guess how many teacher education programs we have? Close to 400. In the history of our country, not one has been denied accreditation. We have 85,000 students each year looking for 7,000 jobs. It's a strange scenario. We've had, in the last 15 years, we've had 101 reviews of the teacher education. All had no effect. The one that's on the table at the moment that I'm responsible for implementing across the country is we're asking a very simple question of those 400 programs. Put the evidence on the table that your graduates can change the learning lives of students. We don't care what your entry is. We don't care how many hours they spent out in the school. We don't care who taught them. We don't care what your program is. We only care about your impact. It's going to be no surprise. Exactly what we're going to ask teachers to do. Not really the teachers. Of course, Microsoft. It must be technology. There's been 148 meta-analyses on technology since 1975. And despite the massive changes in technology since 1975, in fact, I wished it was 1985 because that was the very last time I was in this building. The effect hasn't changed. Not this building, in Redmond. Yeah, of course, it probably didn't exist. You're a few little buildings over there somewhere. It hasn't changed. And I think it's a really fascinating question to ask why technology has not made a difference. And I hope during the day we will pursue that notion. Because doing more of the same, like let's get real, there's nothing wrong with technology coming in and making my job more efficient. But don't imagine you're going to make it better. And making that distinction is really critical. And I'm certainly looking forward to someone coming along and taking those 140 meta-analyses and getting down in deep, because whilst the average is around a 0.3, the variance is ginormous, and there is some good news in there. And hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that today. But on average, when I hear someone coming and saying, I have the app for you, I have the resource for you, I'm not interested. because I want to know why teachers, who are amongst the biggest users of computers, but not in their class, and how we can be much smarter about doing it, which I think is the reason we're talking today. So, sorry guys, not yet. But as you know, pardon me? Not to win?
We're up to 2.
We have more twos than the other no good.
Oh, yeah. It's getting a bit better. So here's the yes.
We totally believe, I think that's one of the biggest learnings we had the last year is the technology isn't the solution, it's not the silver bullet. You've got to begin with outcomes and then use the technology to help you with those outcomes, right? It's like,
Kind of. No, I want to come back to that. I don't even think that's the way to do it.
okay, that's good. Push us on it then.
Yeah, because I want to tease out, like, even when you have an effect size of 0.26, you've got variance. So what's up there? As a hint as to where I'm going in this area is, we've never really used technology as social media in the classroom. I go back to questioning. Like on average, a class asks 2 questions a day. Not kids, a class asks 2 a day. But a kid will ask a teacher a question on social media, even if the teacher's standing there, that they would not ask in a classroom. We can increase student questions and the nature of student questions. Take another example. Let's get real. You don't go to school to learn what you already know. You learn what you don't know. How do we privilege errors, mistakes, and misunderstandings? Like, I hope you're robust because I'm picking on teachers today. What happens when... You're supporting each other. So what happens in your class when a kid puts their hand up and answers your question and gets it wrong? What do you do?
You could try, but this is the answer.
Nah, you're right. 40 to 50% of the times you correct the kid. 40 to 50% of the times you create the Bermuda Triangle of questions. You ask the kid, they get it wrong, so you ask another kid, he gets it right, you've got the perfect Bermuda Triangle. Everyone's out. 5 to 10% of the time you ignore it, and 5 to 10% of the time you use the error as an opportunity to learn. How do we get that 5 to 10% up? Wow. This is where the technology of social media is powerful. And so there's a whole area there about how you can create trusting environments and take what really matters and makes a difference. Totally different to the efficiency, but let me move on. That's an answer. I want to look at these for a moment. And I do these with a straight face, thinking of the words deep pedagogies. And I'm going to put it to you that any program that's got the word deep in it is destined to fail. Look at them. I want to come back to that. That's being a bit naughty. But the doors are locked. She can't get out. No. Not those teaching methods. Let's go to the positive side. My mantra is that. How do we get teachers to see learning through the eyes of students? Like, take for an example, my work when I was living in New Zealand. I spent 12 years living in New Zealand, and one of my jobs there was to create the New Zealand assessment scheme for schools, the national assessment scheme for elementary and high schools. It's a voluntary system. Schools don't have to use it. It was entirely based on telling teachers about their impact. In fact, for the first 4 years, we gave the kids nothing. What I'm most proud of is 80% of teachers and schools in New Zealand voluntarily are using that system 16 years later. It's still there. Teachers are very hungry for the impact. After 4 years, the government decided it was so good we had to give the kids something. We lost a bit there. And we lost a bit because we don't want teachers to think that assessments are for the children. We're going to give you a test to see how well you're going. Well, it's easy. Ask the kids to put the mark on the test before they sit the test, and they're pretty accurate. Unfortunately, they're accurate because they lower their stakes and they put a safe mark. But if you put the whole onus on helping the teacher about their impact and how they can show growth, and if they are showing growth, and this is the argument we make about how you get teachers to see learning through the eyes of students. Like, take it to your classes again. 80% of what happens in your class, you don't see or hear. So I don't care a damn about teacher reflection. Why would you reflect on the 20% you actually saw and heard? Again, I want to talk later on today about how we could use technology to help better see that other 80%. Like, you want to see it. And sometimes you have another teacher come in and sit in the back of the room. They don't help you because they sit and watch you. And they tell you what you should do, more like what they would have done, which is not helping you see that other 80%. In fact, we've developed a tool that actually gets at that other 80%, and we can do it without having a human or a video in the room. And we can reflect back to the teacher as they're doing the lesson and coded during the lesson what's going on around all the kids. But that's another story. But that's one of the foci. Please.
Guessing you're familiar with Sugata Mitra and the whole no teacher idea. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that concept?
Look. Preempting my argument here, it all comes down to the expertise of the teacher, and you want to get rid of the expertise?
I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that whole model that he's done.
Yeah, like, doing some great stuff, but most of us need someone as we start to learn something we know nothing about.
Yeah,
And this, pardon me?
The granny cloud, where there's a person there but not actually teaching necessarily. Letting the students do a lot of the learning on their own almost.
The only effect size that has an average effect size of 0 is student control of learning. Now, let's be fair to his approach. He's not saying no teacher altogether. I have no problems with teachers being there. In fact, if you look at the blue zone, that's dominated by teacher expertise. And so I'm not a great fan of that stuff. It might go well for some kids who are self-motivated and who have great self-regulation skills. But for those kids who are not self-motivated and don't have self-regulation skills, I want to teach them those things. It's like homeschooling. Like the typical kid who goes into homeschooling is already at the 75th percentile of achievement before they go in. Going to some of his kind of schools, you have to be a certain kind of person anyway. That's great for those kids. No. I also want this half, which is what he's trying to do, but I want to do it through expert. We want students to become their own teachers. You know, this is where all the jargon comes in. Like we have metacognition, we have self-regulation, the one that drives me mad, 21st century skills. Come on, guys. Plato and Aristotle talked about this extensively. They're 5th BC century skills. And what worries me, particularly with collaborative problem solving coming into PISA, and as you know, the Melbourne team developed that, some countries are already adding collaborative problem solving as another curriculum area. Whoa. Now, of course it will work because those tests are content free. But like in our recent synthesis of learning strategies, there is no question that if you don't learn the strategies in context, they have 0 transfer. And that's a big problem. And we know CogMed, 0.98 effect size. But in terms of helping kids read, or maths, or science, or physics, 0. They get better at playing those games. So my arguments, all those things, which I also value, 21st century skills, so is that. We want kids to know what to do when they don't know what to do. And I find it ironic that 5-year-olds are not bad at it. By age 8, they have learned that their job is to come to school and watch you teach. Sorry. We've got the whole thing reversed there. Let's go to the good news. If I had that simple mantra, it's all about teachers who know their impact. And I just think it's great that number 2 up there, student has said, how do you teach kids, deliberately teach kids to be part of that equation so they know their impact? And we've all had this formative and summative notion, which I'm a great fan of, because Michael Scriven, who's one of my good friends, invented them many, many years ago. But it's totally and utterly abused. Your country's about to go through that abuse again where you talk about formative and summative assessment. There is no such concept. You give me a test, any test in the world, and I can make formative and summative interpretations. And so what we did in New Zealand is we decided not to go down that route. And we relabeled formative and called it student assessment capabilities. Our job is to teach the kids to interpret the assessments. And as my measurement hat on, what I've spent my last sort of 10 years looking at, particularly with our tool that we developed in New Zealand, is how do you come up with reports that teachers not only get correct, but there's a consequence of those reports. In fact, when we developed our assessment, we spent our first millions on developing the reports, and we backward designed then to get the test to fit the reports, not the other way around, which is the common way of doing it. And certainly in that system, 7-year-olds can go in and sit their own test and interpret their own tests. And that's what it should be like. And when teachers put up response to intervention, they put intervention, they seek the response. Classroom discussion, one of the most powerful ways to hear your impact. In the MET study you guys were involved with over the years, 3,000 schools, 3,000 classrooms, 3 months. Webcam in the room. 65% of classes did not have a single classroom discussion. Now, I know why. Because in many senses, kids are very good at the surface level of teaching each other the wrong stuff. I know it's very inefficient to have a classroom discussion. Wow. I'd love to talk about how technology is powerful to have discussions. The new number one. I think it's wonderful. Fits the model beautifully. A school leader that can help give all the teachers in the school, all adults in the school, the efficacy, the confidence that they can actually change those kids' lives. Now, hey, you have to feed it. And you have to feed it with data about impact, or else it'll be a very short-term gain. But again, it's that notion of how teachers, and certainly when we did the analysis in New Zealand we followed the kids, 1 million odd kids, from age 8 to age 18, right through the school system. And when we reported back to the government, it was very simple. We said there is a single problem in this country. I have a hunch it's the same in this country. Teachers do not have a common conception of progress. Every time a kid hits a new teacher, it's up or down, random, whether they go up or down, depending on their conception of progress. How do you come up with ways? In New Zealand, we've come up with a great solution. High school, we solved it in 3 years. Elementary school, 8 years in, it's still a bit random. And we're doing a tremendous amount of crowdsourcing of kids putting their work up online, other teachers and other kids evaluating and scoring it. It's having a huge effect.
Yeah, you talked about a school leader creating a collective sense of teacher efficacy and using data to do that. Can
Totally.
you talk a little bit more about any examples you have there or what that might look like?
Yeah, like the argument is that the 3 major forms of data. Test scores. This is where you look in a high trust environment. So the whiff of accountability can't be there, for good or bad. Some of the schools, like we're working in about 7,000 schools around the world at the moment. Sometimes it takes a year to build that trust. Put the test scores on, ask about the changes, and particularly looking at the change over time. Like, unfortunately, most tests in schools are at a moment tests. Teachers create them so that kids get 80 to 90%, which are hopeless. The best tests are those which kids get 50% right and 50% wrong. That's what the Aldes tool does. Doesn't say that because most teachers find that quite anathema to think that way. But unfortunately, that's the best kind of formative assessment. So you put that on the table. Student voice. Kids are pretty accurate. And if kids don't understand they're not making a change, that's one thing you have to change. And we do a lot of classroom observation of the impact on kids. We triangulate that. The biggest issue we want to talk about all the time is what are the interpretations that you're making from that data? Like in New Zealand, the system does not ask the schools for a single scrap of data. But every school, every year, this is a bit carried away by the way, every school every year has to put in the OTJs for every kid, the overall teacher judgments, along the curriculum line. Now they have an inspection system. The inspection system goes into a school and makes sure that it's well moderated. That's why 8 years later it's still not much better than random numbers. Now, the last election was actually fought over national standards, and the government that introduced them won the election, so they're still there. The opposition want to get rid of them. Teachers want to get rid of them. I'm sorry. I don't want to get rid of them. You get rid of them, you're hiding again under the table. Why should it be that your kid goes into a class with a teacher that has standards up here and another teacher in the same year level has standards down there? Now, the teacher whose standards down there is unbelievably successful at dumbing your kid down. And I can show you school after school after school where you can show year 4, 5, 6, 7, and other schools, year 4, 5, 6, 7. The kids do not change in 4 years. But what the teachers do is they argue that the stuff they give kids is harder, and it is. But they ask the same simple questions. So no, I'd love to talk a lot more about data-driven impact, data teams. We've moved away from data because most schools hate it. Most schools are awash with data. It is about that notion of what does impact mean? The 3 impact questions. What do you mean in your school by impact? Don't ask me. What do you mean by it? Yeah, I can help you. Do it. The second question is, what is the magnitude of your impact? Because as you saw, just getting any impact is trivial. What does a year's growth look like for a year's input in studio? What is your colleagues who also work in that area? Do they agree with you? It's a year's growth. Now, be careful. That's a very dangerous conversation because we're going to the heart of your professionalism here. right? But you have to have it. Because if your colleagues think that whatever grade, year 9 or year 8, that in studio you can get this, another one says that, you got a problem. And the third is the equity question. How many kids in the school are getting that year's growth for a year's input? And all our work is focused on those 3 questions. You can see it's coming back to the same message. And are there high expectations? And certainly what we found with Christine Ruby Davies' work, that teachers do have expectations. If they're high, they're very successful. If they're low, they're very successful. And you can see it's very, very powerful. Telling kids up front what success looks like. Most kids up to around the ages of 8, 9, 10 will do anything you ask them to, almost. After that, they'll say, why am I doing this? And for some of them, it's a bit like if I took you outside to here now and asked you to jump a high jump, but I'm not going to show you where the bar is. Some of you say, don't be stupid. Some of you give it a go, then look silly. But unfortunately, for many kids, that's what school's like. Do the work and we'll tell you 6 months later or 6 weeks later where the bar is. And this one comes through so often, showing kids up front a worked example. Like I was a music teacher, it's not too difficult to do it. But other subjects, and it's one of the hardest things we do in schools. Teachers will say, no, we can't show kids what they're going to look like in 6 weeks' time. What if I don't get there? What if it doesn't work out that way? You think, wait a moment. We tried naively to get teachers to set assessments up front that they would administer 6 weeks later. Oh, can't do it. We actually gave kids the option of going into the tool we developed in New Zealand and look at what the work would look like, the assessments would look like 6 or 8 weeks later. Stunningly successful for the kids, but the teachers wouldn't let them do it. And so there's still a big problem of how you can show this work up front. We're still working on it. And challenge. Wow, how do we change the idea around from teachers saying, my job is to break this work down so it's easy for kids to learn? How do we get kids to say, this is hard, I want to do it? Not, this is hard, I can't. How do we get that balance, that Goldilocks principle right? Not too hard, but not too boring. And now you guys, well, not so much Microsoft, but in the technology world, look at video games. They've worked it out. They know the rules of education perfectly. They know how to work out what your diagnosis is, your prior score. They know the criteria of success, the Goldilocks principle, not too hard, not too easy. They also know something teachers don't know. When you set the success criteria, you don't change it. You don't say at the end of the lesson, oh, you did your best. Kids aren't stupid. Then what happens? It gives you an incredible amount of deliberate practice time. And deliberate practice is that it's not just random practice, just not more time on task. There's lots of feedback, you go and get cues. And what happens when you get to the success criteria and you get to the level? Not like teachers. Teachers say, oh, good work, hand it in, you've done it, now go out and play. What do the computer games do? They raise it. And so this is where this notion of challenge, how do you help kids onto the challenge of learning? Pardon me?
Where do parent expectations?
Very powerful. In fact, that's my job at the moment, visible learning for parents. Parent expectations and encouragements far, far dominates resources in the home. And again, to that Goldilocks principle, we surveyed every parent who came into the 5 lowest SES schools in New Zealand, lowest socioeconomic schools in New Zealand, as 5-year-olds. What do you want your kids to be when they leave school? You got good distribution, I want to go into university, I want to go into this. By age 11, when they left the primary school, we interviewed those parents again. Not one of them in 5,000 parents said their kid would go into university. As a school system, we failed those kids by the time they got to 11. We told the parents to lower their expectations. You cannot tell me in 5,000 kids some can't go on. We've followed those kids through and virtually none have gone on. Parents' expectations are very powerful, and this is where I would argue strongly we have a major role to educate parents about their expectations and their encouragement. And surely the purpose of schooling is to allow kids to exceed what they think their potential is. So I think parents are very powerful, and this is where I think parents need to come to learning. We've spent a lot of time in Australia over the last few years doing major television programs about what happens in schools to get the focus away from the structural ones to what does learning mean.
So you have a book visual?
No, I'm working on it. That's why I'm in Santa Barbara.
For parents?
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Cool.
I've broken the back of it, but I'm not there yet because I can't write. I write academic ease. So I've got a colleague. In fact, my son's going to help me. change it into better language and get away from the academic ease. But it's very much based around the notion of how it's appropriate to have expectations and encouragement. How can you engage your kid in learning? I'm arguing that the job of home is not to replicate the school. How do you get kids involved in challenge? How do you get them to persist even in times of adversity? That's why I'm keen to hear your daughter who's coming back from an outward bound experience out in the Spokane way. Was it your daughter? And how because in those situations, we did the meta-analysis on outward bound programs in the 90s. And what was the most intriguing is that they do have a big effect on self-esteem. But their biggest effect is on relationships. And like if you're going down a river and you get stuck, or you're rappelling down a mountain and you get stuck, 99% of us cannot get out of it by ourselves. You need others. What happens when you get into a problem in a classroom? Well, keep working on it, I'll help you. We don't structure classrooms for problem solving. Like take another one, maths and science graduates. In this country, the job opportunities are going down. So you've got to seriously ask why you'd bother with maths and science. But when you break it down by the moderator, maths and science graduates with no social skills, it's a chasm. Maths and science students with social skills, it's upwards. We want communicators, we want interpreters, we want problem solvers, we want team players. What's happening in schools now? Sit by yourself, do it by yourself, sit the test by yourself. Wow. Hence the power of feedback, power of trust. I'm not going to do that right now. So, my folks, my message is not those things. Let's stop these debates and let's start having debates of how we can actually worry about that expertise of teachers. They're not all equal. They're all on developmental trend. And you look at those contrasts there in terms of that difference, I think it's phenomenal. That's 2 years gain when you're in teachers with those kinds of impacts. And look back at that blue zone. There's plenty of them out there. In fact, Mr. Obama, Mr. Trump, Mrs. Clinton, the schools in this country are surrounded with excellence. But have you got the courage to dependably identify those in the blue zone, form a coalition of success around them, and then have them invite those in the yellow zone in? That's the visible learning story. That's what we're trying to do. I'm going to pause at this point because the argument I'm making is that it's about how experts think. It's not what they do. And these are the 10 mind frames we've been working on about how the experts think, but that's another whole session. I'm going to leave them as a tempter. Can I privilege those who are on the Skype? Do they have a question first?
Absolutely. In fact, there's been over 30 people making comments on Skype throughout. So all of you in Skype land, thank you. One of the questions was about sibling impact. And how do siblings interact to impact learning progress?
It's an unusual one. Certainly, the variation between, this is the intriguing thing writing a parenting book. Same kids, same family, same encouragement expectations, dramatically different. The kid does bring something to the equation. And I know you're not allowed to talk about it. The book I published after Visible Learning was called Intelligence and IQ Testing. It did not sell many. But it does exist, despite the fact that it's PC not to talk about it. Kids do differ right from birth, before birth, in terms of their dispositions, in terms of their abilities, how they go about interacting, what happens in terms of different families, in terms of the kinds of sibling effect. The general effect on siblings is actually not much in terms of learning. So like birth order, it's almost irrelevant. Who becomes better kid at school? Very hard to predict in terms of all the structural things. Very, very hard. So hardly at all. Okay, let's go ask another one there, then we'll ask here.
Sure. There was, what is the impact of these kinds of interventions, and does it differ at all for older groups, like for 18 to and older?
The research I've been doing is 4-year-old to 20. The researcher in me, of course, what you're looking for all the time are the moderators. What makes the difference? It doesn't make a difference with age, doesn't make a difference with class size, doesn't make it with country, doesn't make a difference with subject. The answer in this research is virtually nothing makes a difference. The how we learn stuff, there are really critical moderators. But in terms of achievement, no. that upsets the studio people who thinks their classes are unique. Sorry, what works the same in the studio classes. Oh my God, I owe you a lunch for being so horrible to you. Do you have a question? No, you don't have to. Here, please.
So, thank you very much, by the way, and thank you for hosting this. Fascinating that you've talked about the methods of great teaching and encouraging collaboration, incrementing levels, making challenges attainable, showing success criteria. Sounds an awful lot like athletics, right? And so I'm curious, you mentioned video games. To what extent is the coach, to whom teachers would look down upon as an educator, to what extent is a top-tier coach actually embodying the values that you say educators should have?
Well, one of the intriguing things over the last 5 or 7 years is that the word coaching has come into education for the reasons you're saying. One of the other jobs, there's a weird sport in Australia called Australian Rules. If you've ever been to Australia, it's dominant. We're actually now working with 3 clubs teaching their coaches how to do this kind of stuff. The parallel's dramatic. The other beauty about coaches is that most coaches actually aren't interested in, this is too strong. They're not so interested in you as a person, they're interested in your part in the team. Now, let me go a step further. If you go to some of our eastern countries, China, Japan, you go when I went to school in the 1950s, we were widgets. I was known by my last name, I was exchangeable. Nowadays, you can't do that. We care deeply about the kids, for good reason. And that's one of the differences. In the coaches, it's about the team and the attributes of that and how you fit into it. Sometimes I think we've gone too far in this whole notion that every kid is different. Of course they are. But actually great teachers look for similarities, cope with differences. Great teachers do use a lot of team playing, but you hardly ever see it in most classes. You do see it in a lot of team sports. And therein lies the overlap, I think, is quite dramatic. I want to take the best of both worlds. I worry about the word coaching coming into education because to me coaching is just good teaching, but if that's what we have to do to break the mould and get away from teachers thinking that every one of them is brilliant, every one of them is making a good job, everyone worries about the structural thing, just give me the right kids. Like, it's interesting when you ask teachers, and it's been done many times, about why kids can't learn, without a shadow of doubt, the last thing they ever mention, if at all, is them. You tell that little coach why a team's not working. Who takes the onus of responsibility very fast?
We can take New Zealand. What is your feeling about the content of what, from age 15 to 18, say, of what is being taught? And
It's irrelevant.
no, I mean, well, that's, I mean,
Well, take maths. In this country, you have a lot of finite maths in that age group. In New Zealand, there's 0.
there's
Zero.
There's
in the
zero
curriculum.
what?
There's no finite maths in the maths curriculum.
Finite math?
Finite maths. Statistics dominates maths in the New Zealand high schools. It doesn't much exist in this country in high school maths, in your Common Core. I don't care what the content is. I care that it's appropriately challenging. I can't find a difference. I take curricula, and I could take it across every one of the states and right down to the districts, and I've done this. Andrew Porter's done this. I can take it from around the world. I can put it on the table. The first thing I can tell you is there's no such thing as Common Core. There's no such thing as correct progression. Everyone does it differently. So I care that someone does it. I just don't want to get obsessed about it. Your turn.
Well, there are people arguing that a lot of what students in that age range are being asked to learn is not really, that those students can look around and see that their parents don't know it, and
That's
their
right.
parents are perfectly successful,
Correct.
and they're just asking why do you have any expectations? And there are people arguing that we shouldn't be teaching,
Oh, yes, you're right.
and we're teaching entirely towards college. The colleges are defining what gets taught by deciding what you need to study
Oh, absolutely.
in order to get in. And so I guess so the question is, we could get very good at teaching people to learn something that maybe we shouldn't be expecting them to learn. And I don't have that opinion. I'm just asking what
Let
your
me
view
answer
is.
slightly differently. That, like in New Zealand, when I went there, the completion rate of high school was 80%. 1 in 5 failed. If you believe that, as I do as a father of 4 boys who've gone through the school system, that the biggest predictor of adult health, wealth and happiness is not achievement at school. It's the number of years of schooling. So how do we make schools inviting places to people to come? And if you take 1 in 5 not making it, you've got troubles. In Victoria, 98% of adults in prison did not finish high school. The cost to the society is huge. So what we did in New Zealand is we looked at the high school, which was very dominated by a very narrow canon of physics, maths, history, chemistry, etc. And we said doing more of that is not going to help that other 20%. It was dominated by the universities. We said, fine, universities, do what you like. We're not responsible for you. And so we turned it on its head and we said, any subject that can come up with assessments that can reliably distinguish between excellent, merit achieved and not achieved will count in the high school system. The language teachers said, can't be done. All our students are excellent. We said, fine, you're out. Panel meeting said, we're just pass fail. We said, fine, you're out. Within 3 years, all those subjects worked out how to reliably do it, and within 3 years, we went from 80% to 92% completion rate. I care about the discrimination in excellence. There are multiple ways to be excellent. One of my sons, who's gone on and works in a rival company to yours, doing extremely well. Went through university, ancient history, now works at a computer company, blah, blah. The other one, water polo coach. The school dealt with his passion for water polo, found more challenging tasks. He then got a scholarship to come to this country to go into water polo at a university. My point is we have to come up with multiple ways for challenge. That's why I don't really care about whether the parents know it or don't know it. Kids want challenge. And you ask a kid who's doing finite maths or chemistry how relevant it is, they kind of don't care in the sense they want to learn more about it. I want them to turn on to the passion of their subject.
Can you tell me more about the assessments and feedback the teacher should be getting to evaluate their impact and their progress?
Yeah, the feedback that I want the teacher to get is related to the notion of the impact they're having on the kid. Like, I'm a great fan in growth over time, which cuts out most of our current assessments. I want both, actually. We actually have a grid of progress and achievement. And certainly what I can show you from the Australian data is close to 80% of our kids, 70% of our kids and our schools are in low progress, high achievement. We have more cruising schools than you do. Unfortunately, our country thinks those kids, because they're doing well, are in great schools. They're not, they're hopeless schools. So we place schools on, kids and schools on that grid, and we monitor their change over time. We look at also as I said, how you can get better student voice captured for the teacher in a systematic way. We've developed an app that we can get that. And so the teacher's looking at that, because I'm thinking I'm having a great effect on this kid. The kid's not thinking they're having an effect. We look at artifacts of kids' work, and we're trying to come up with better ways of coding that. That's more instant for the teacher. The trouble with a lot of teachers is they see you in terms of what you did last time, and therefore that's what you're going to do. My job as a teacher is to help you exceed your expectations, not to meet your need, not to help you reach your potential. And so I also need some bars about kids like me. Like, one of the things we're doing at the moment is we're looking at how kids get, particularly around 12, 13-year-olds in mathematics. We give them an assessment, then we go back and look at all the kids who made the same mistakes over the past tests and find out what kind of things they did that then turned them on. Not what they got wrong, because that's keep reinforcing the things they got wrong. I think there is lots of ways. Like, you show me any tests in this country that's used for prediction. Everything's done in the past. That's the kind of thing we're trying to do that helps teachers understand their impact. And certainly, it's true, some teachers have low impact. How do you create a culture where that's a step to improving, not a disaster? Yeah, we can do that.
Question from Skype. Principal Jennifer Rose, what are the models that work to affect system change? Which levers, accountability measures, or motivators seem to be most powerful for whole system change?
And she wants that in a minute. Look, given my political job, obviously that's high priority, and certainly one of my arguments is we've got to stop principles and systems being Oliver Twist. All I want is more money and leave me alone. Autonomy is one of my hate words in the business. I find it intriguing. Like, I'm not bad at searching literature. When I ask how many articles can I find about how you upscale success in this business, in the history of education I can find 5. We have no concept of upscaling. We're still dealing one at a time. And so I want systems where you've got an upscaling notion, where you are prepared to have the courage to identify the success, where you then have got the trust that you then ask those that are not in the success to join, and that's what we're doing. So I think it can be done dramatically, but it's all focused on that impact you're having on kids, not the satisfaction of the teachers or the satisfaction of the parents. Back there, then yeah.
Curious to follow up on your earlier comment where teachers see 20%, but that you are able to kind of, you have some tools.
I have some tool about the 20%. I'm repeating it for these people.
Yes, please.
Yeah. But no, they can do.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be Microsoft, everything's wide.
So what are the tools that you are using to help visualize the 80% that teachers aren't seeing?
I want to know the secret. It turns out there's two halves to that. The app that we've got, which is free and it's up there and it can be used, only does simple things. Like it measures how much time she talks, the nature of her questions, the nature of student questions. We have another part of the system that does require a person. It's very simple. We ask the teacher to take their phone, dial a local number, instead of putting the earphones here, put them here, teach your lesson. At the other end of that phone, there's a real person, a professional captioner. And we employ television companies because they do it for their job, so this is an extra, so there's no great upstart costs. That captioner re-speaks. At the same time they're re-speaking, they're coding. They can have back on the whiteboard or on the student's laptop, within 3 seconds, everything the teacher says perfectly written out. The kids can then rate the lesson in terms of their learning as they're doing it. The time the teacher walks out of the room, they can get their transcript, which is usually quite bulky. They can get their analytics. They can get it coded. They can get the kids' information. We know within 2 hours a week for 5 hours, for 5 weeks, for 40 to 50% of the teachers, they're doing okay, we can improve them. Another 20 to 30 who are not doing so okay, we can change them. They change them by themselves, simply getting the data. Unfortunately, there's another 20% that are at the bottom of the distribution who won't use the data, who close it down. Because we started this project 4 years ago and then we're not prepared to release it until we've come up with a scalable solution, until we solve that latter problem, we're not there. But yes, we can do it. And it's not that expensive to do, and it's instantaneous. And as I said before, there's not a person, there's not a video. And teachers in general like it, but that last 20% don't.
I just suggest Skype translator can be used to closed caption.
I think I can say this and not get away with it, yeah. How accurate Siri?
Well,
We don't care.
so
You're as accurate as Cortana.
I mean, it's not perfect, I agree, but you would get some indication. It's being used in schools to assist the deaf students who are in the school.
That's how our project started with deaf kids. The trouble with most of those things, the Siri and we've used Mechanical Turk and all those, you get a 70-80% accuracy rate. Particularly for kids, for teachers, not interested. We will not pay our captioners unless they get 99.5% accuracy. And we do. They're just not good enough yet. Like sooner or later they will be. But at the moment, it's like if I ask you to read a book that for every page there's a word you don't understand. You won't read it. We demand because of you guys, we demand incredibly high standards of our technology. And I'm sorry, Siri and Skype Translate are just not good enough. And if the kids sitting there trying to work out what on earth this means, forget it. Teachers won't let it happen. One here, and then I'm sorry, you're the time, I could go on for hours. But
Sure, this one's my question. If you wrote the book
that's
visible
naughty.
learning for students, what would it look like?
It would be very much about how they can become their own teachers. It'd be about what they do when they don't know what to do next. That's part of the reason we spent the last 3 years looking at the learning strategy side of it. And that turns out to be not as simple. And that's why I want to come back, and I should do this because I didn't do this about my comment before about deep learning. There's at least 3 phases in learning: surface, deep, and transfer. Surface is about the content, the ideas. Deep is about relating those ideas, and transfer is trying it in a new situation. It turns out the strategies differ quite dramatically at the 3 phases. So when I was writing a book about the students, is how would you know this is a surface or a deep? Unfortunately, I don't have to ask them about transfer because it hardly ever happens, more's the pity. Like take problem-based learning. 11 meta-analyses. We don't have to do another study to know problem-based learning is one of the most failing systems we know in the world. All those things I put up about deep, hopeless. 90% of what happens in the classroom, for better or worse, kids only need surface level knowledge to do it. Does problem-based learning work? Absolutely it works at the deep stage. But 90% of the classroom surface, which is why it doesn't work. And that's why I argued to you guys way back in London years ago, deep pedagogies will fail. Surface to deep will work. Again, as a researcher, what I'm trying to work at the moment, how many studies have ever asked the question, when's the right time to switch from surface to deep? Now, the answer is actually not a moment in time. But that whole notion. Now, my measurement self says, if you structure the measurement task so there's half, actually we have a 30% rule, 30% surface, 30% deep, I don't care about the rest, that will then drive the instruction to show kids that you measure both. And that's actually what we did in the New Zealand tour. It's easy to solve. The trouble is, teachers will argue black and blue in the face that all their work's deep. Academics even more so. But what skills does the kid need? Just the surface. We've got to get that balance right.
Wrap up. So be respectful. He's got a really full day today, so some folks who are meeting with him later, I'm sure he'd be happy to answer other questions that people have. You can go through Maria to get questions to him. So thank you very much, John.
Thank you, guys.